I invite everyone to stay in that vibration. That is a favorite song of mine, and it surely is a prayer that the presence of the Lord is in this place, not just in this physical church or in your home, but in this place of the heart. I invite you to just take a moment, if you will, to close your eyes, bow your head, whatever it takes to be comfortable for just a moment as we enter this time of prayer and meditation. Let your body relax for a moment and begin to find the rhythm of your breath. Breathing in, breathing out, slowly and surely, effortlessly, easily. And let that breath just take you inside. This is the time where we pray and we realize that every need is known to God. Every need is understood by the loving heart of Spirit. Every need is also answered in the way that it is for our highest and best. Take another deep breath. In this time of quiet prayer, we can turn inward, place of the presence. It's in that place of the presence that we can turn chaos into order, that we can turn doubt into faith. And it helps us to erase any appearance otherwise, an appearance of illness that can be replaced with the appearance of life, the appearance of lack with the appearance of abundance. Take another deep breath. Relax your body and your mind, turning our attention to the presence of love at the very center of our being. That is the experience which we call. This is the oneness that we know, for we are one with that love, with that experience of God and with all of life, that divine presence that is infinite and eternal. Centered in that awareness, we can let love, God, Spirit wash over us, through us, filling us, flowing from us. This is the love that lifts our heart and sets us free. This is the wisdom of our mind, the peace of our soul, the presence within us to understand, the power within us to forgive, the knowing within us to become. So we take this time to come together and move into a silent place where we can know it, not just through the words that we speak, but from the very heart of who and what we are. We can drink in the energy of that divine presence, shifting our focus from any outer details to the inner essence, to that Christ consciousness, knowing that every step on our path of life has brought us to this time, to this place. Let us meet it in the silence. Guided by the light of that divine presence, we can choose to live this day with confidence, high expectations for the blessings that abound. We can be centered in that divine flow of good, and we can readily affirm that the energy of life, of this time and this space, can move us forward from a place of deep peace and gratitude. And we can affirm with each next breath our oneness. And we can affirm that great divine presence never leaves us, never forsakes us, always with us. And so it is. Amen. Well, good morning to all of you again. I am Reverend Chaz Wesley, and it's my honor to be with you. And it's my honor to join in this series about the four agreements. I have to tell you a personal story as I begin. This is one of my favorite books. I have been studying this book for well over a decade, and I've been teaching it almost that long. It's an interesting story in that the way I found it was not through a bookstore, wasn't through a friend, but rather I was at the dentist's office. Almost 22 years ago, I was sitting in the dentist chair. And interestingly enough, I don't have a television at home. I haven't had a television in decades. It's how I keep my sanity. But at the dentist office, it's a favorite thing to watch the television as I'm laying back. And my dentist chair reclines all the way back, and there is a television on the ceiling. And I have my dentist appointment every 6 months or so at the very same time, 4:00. And at that time, Ellen DeGeneres is on the air. And they hand me the remote in the dentist chair, and I turn it to Ellen, and I watch her 2 or 3 times a year from the dentist chair. And one year she was interviewing Don Miguel Ruiz, who wrote this book, The Four Agreements. And in that moment, as I was having some dental work done, I noticed a change that came over me from the words that he was speaking, from the awareness that Ellen herself had. And as I began to study it, I also looked into how Ellen found this wonderful author and this work. And when she did, she actually called and talked to Oprah about it. And do you know it took Oprah another 13 years to interview Don Miguel Ruiz? Even though Oprah is famous for her book clubs and reading and sharing great works of art through literature, it took her that long, and I wonder why. And interestingly enough, as in my private practice of counseling, I ask clients all the time, have you heard of this book, The Four Agreements? And invariably, the answer is no, which is so interesting because another decade after Oprah interviewed him, this book has been now taught in major religions across the world. It's certainly most of the non-traditional centers who align with it, but it's also being taught in churches, colleges, elementary schools, middle schools, military establishments, jails. And still, almost everyone I talk to and say, have you heard of this book? They say no. So by a show of hands, who here has read the book, The Four Agreements? Who has read it more than once? What's really funny about that is I can't see any of you, so I'm just assuming someone raised their hand. You know, it's interesting because the powerful self-mastery teachings of Don Miguel Ruiz, who was Nagual, which is another word for shaman, came from a pre-Columbian Toltec lineage. It walks hand in hand with our unity principles. We also know that in the years following, his sons, both of his sons, have taken that torch and been teaching this all over the globe. One of his sons, Don Jose, actually co-wrote his next book called The Fifth Agreement. And the understanding of this is that the concept of agreements on which his work is based is the belief that while we are born free, during what he calls the domestication process, think of a domesticated dog or cat, that we too, as humans, have been domesticated, that we make a series of agreements with ourselves, with the people around us, with society as a whole. And these are agreements of which we are not always conscious. And those agreements that we make can lead us from that innocent freedom into lives that are a little more circumscribed by restrictive and limited false beliefs and understandings of who we are and of who we are not, of what is possible and what is not possible. And throughout our life experience, we receive messages from a lot of people. We receive messages from our parents growing up, from our siblings, from our friends. Through school, we receive messages from our teachers. We receive messages from our government, from society. And these messages set up some expectations that we then have to strive to meet, expectations that can lead us away from our true potential. And this limited constraint is passed on with the best intentions, because these are people who love us, who want us to be successful. But the problem is that most we are taught is not congruent with the truest and highest self. Ruiz himself says that he thinks 95% of what we are taught is a lie. Science tells us that we have 70,000 thoughts a day, but only a third of those are ever true. And so the author believes that most of what we see and hear is not a dream. And there's a whole section in the book that talks about the dream of the planet, the dream that we have created in our mind, that all of us congregate and collectively create a dream for our planet. And when that happens, we are taught the difference between good and bad, between right and wrong, beautiful and ugly. And we see that then we have an opportunity to choose, but we're not choosing through that impeccability. And we're going to talk about that word in a moment. It is these unconscious agreements that rule our lives, he says. And so he advocates for his 4 and now 5 agreements as a practical guide to personal freedom. And the first and most important of the 4 agreements is to be impeccable with your word. All of those words in that agreement are important. The word is your power of creation, the power that can be used more than one direction. One direction is impeccability, where the word creates a beautiful story, and thus it creates a personal heaven on earth. And then the other direction is the misuse or the misunderstanding of your word, where the word destroys everything around you and creates a personal hell. The word, as he talks about, is really a symbol. And when he talks about the symbols that we use, for instance, I could say the word horse, and that's a symbol or an image that's created in the mind. And that word or that symbol has some magic to it. It's a power of creation because it can reproduce that image, that idea, that feeling, and it can reproduce an entire story in our imagination. For instance, when I talk about the word storm, that can reproduce an entire image in your mind. That's the power of symbol. And it can be more powerful than that just by saying 2 words. If I said the words The Godfather or Harry Potter, then a whole movie can appear in your mind. That's the magic. Your power of creation begins with the word. So my question, do you remember when you were really young, growing up, first in your family and then later as you made your way through school, maybe even attending religious services like this? And all of the things, all of the rules and the concepts and the laws that you and I and all of us were taught as we made our way along that life experience, what happened was we learned what our language was, what our religion was, what the rules of the household were, and what would happen if we did not follow them. We continue to learn the rewards and the punishments as we move through all those parts of our society, home, school, church, work, wherever. Ruiz calls these agreements, and I love that he does that because he could have used other words. But these agreements with our souls, these agreements that we've made with our family, with our school, with our workplace, we allow ourselves to be domesticated by our society because we have hundreds, if not thousands, or tens of thousands of agreements. And if we wished for acceptance, for instance, then we could strive to follow that rule of acceptance through the rule of reward and punishment. This was what brought us love, and who doesn't want love? But what we learned was, if you're beautiful enough, you will be loved. If you're smart enough, you will be loved. If you're strong enough, you will be loved. If you stand out with your talent, athletically, academically, musically, artistically, if you stand out in any way, You will be loved. You will have fans. You will be adored. Ruiz tells us that whenever we hear an opinion and we believe it, we make an agreement. And that becomes part of our belief system, our personal belief system. And somewhere someone told us through their word that we were not enough. And we agreed to that. So we end up judging ourselves. He uses that word a lot too. We become both the judge and the victim. We are comparing ourselves against others. We judge those others as well, and we search for perfection. It's an endless search, of course. And all of the agreements that we make throughout life, the most important ones are the ones that we have not with another person, not with our school or our government, but with ourselves. And we agree about who we are, what we feel, what we believe, how to behave. I see it as our true self and our true integrity. And when we hold onto agreements that make us suffer, then we have a life of suffering. They hold us back. They limit us. They interfere with that inner knowing of our growth. And we have to find the will, the courage to break those fear-based agreements. Interestingly, in Unity, if you study the 12 spiritual powers, August is the month of will. And so as I talk about that, think about that. We have to find the will, the courage, the brave part of us to break agreements that are based in fear and align with agreements based in love. And to do that, we can use all 4 of these agreements. So again, over the next course of this whole month, you'll have different speakers talking about these 4 agreements. Today, be impeccable with your word. Next week, I think, is don't take anything personally. Easy peasy, right? Don't make assumptions. Always do your best. And by making a pact with these 4 or 5 agreements, an individual is able to dramatically impact the amount of happiness they feel in their life. Regardless of what's going on externally, they can impact the amount of happiness within. So be impeccable with your word. Listen to every one of those words. Impeccable with your word. In understanding Ruiz's mind as he was writing this and talking about this, this is what he called the most important of all the agreements, to be impeccable with your word. The reason is because it's also the most difficult one to honor. We're told that being impeccable means without sin. We understand that words come from other places than just the English language. So we're looking at the Greek and the Latin and the actual epitome of what this word used to mean and however it's been translated. So Ruiz is anything telling us that sin is anything that is against you, against yourself. And when you are impeccable, you take responsibility for your actions, but you don't judge or blame yourself. So we can say that I will be impeccable with my word all day long, but trust me, and you will find this if you're tuned into it, every day that you stand in front of the mirror, you are anything but impeccable with your word. If you get out of the shower and you're standing in front of the mirror in the morning, are you saying, my, what a gorgeous person, what a healthy person? Or are you saying, oh, I wish I could lose a little weight. I sure am fat. I wish I had different hair. I wish I were different. You know, it's more than just being honest. It's more than just having our speech that comes out and saying something willy-nilly. It's more about having the use of our speech to lift up ourselves and those around us to build community rather than to tear it down. And so being impeccable with our word really begins with ourselves. We all know that a lot of negative talk, self-talk, happens in that bathroom mirror every day. And we probably talk more negatively about ourselves than we do anyone else. But if we use that negative talk with ourselves, it's bound to come out against others eventually in some way. And of course, we all make mistakes. We can all take responsibility for our words and our actions, without having to express or communicate or think about it differently. But we can't move forward until we do. And our words are not just a sound or a written symbol, they are energy. Our words are a force of nature. It is a power that we all have to express and communicate, to think and to create. And we humans are the only creatures on the planet who have that ability. We're the only ones that have the power of the word to create like magic. I'm going to talk a little bit more about Harry Potter. One of my favorite quotes from the movie of Harry Potter came from Dumbledore, and he said this: "Words are, in my not so humble opinion, our most inexhaustible source of magic, capable of both inflicting injury and remedying it." Words have power. You've heard that before in your lifetime. Their meaning crystallizes perceptions that shape our beliefs, drive our behavior, ultimately creating the world in which we live. And their power arises from our emotional responses when we read or speak or even hear them. So take a word like interview. Take a word like interrogation. If you've ever interviewed someone, you know it's more of an interrogation than an interview. But which one would you like to hear when you're walking into the meeting? Each one presented a different version in your mind as to what you might experience in that meeting, did it not? So we need to choose our words wisely, carefully, mindfully. And we learned a long time ago all about gossip. He talks a lot about that in this particular agreement, that gossip is like a black magic, not one that's used for good. And as children, we heard the adults around us gossip. We openly gave our opinions about others. And even in the church setting, we can use a prayer request or a prayer chain as gossip. There are songs written, I heard it through the grapevine. So gossip is a big thing, but it's not being impeccable with our word. Gossip is much like a computer virus, using the same language within the code of the computer, but with a harmful intent rather than a positive one. And often hearing something said about another is kind of imprinted in our mind. It's difficult for us to release it, to let it go. This is the harm of gossip. So you have a preconceived opinion about someone often before you even meet them. And so we end up looking not through our own lens of truth and understanding, but through another person's lens and their fear and their judgment instead of our own. But when we use our word to support another, to share love, to have positive thoughts and feelings, then we're actually not just loving that person, but loving ourselves. And we can use our word against another, which is actually using our word if we don't love ourselves. As I mentioned, words are kind of like symbols. They are not inherent things or the actions that they connote, but words are symbols, they're a force, and they're the most powerful tool that we have. Our sense of ourself is deeply impacted by that word or those words that came from our family, teachers, and they describe everything: good, bad, smart, not so bright, lazy, prideful, shameful, handsome, ugly, whatever the word is. On the basis of those cues, we form a false picture of ourselves, and those words can either free us or enslave us. 20-some years ago, when he wrote this book, he talked about how the word was used on the planet, and he wrote a lot about Hitler and how Hitler sent out these seeds of fear by the words that he used, and successfully manipulated an entire country of intelligent people. We look at what's going on the planet today, and we can see that in other governments, maybe even including our own, where all over the world, people can be destroying other people because they are afraid of something or someone. And note that these words that he was using about gossip, about spreading fear, were written 20 some years ago, before social media, before Facebook and Instagram. And so when he talks about gossip being this great mass communication, that was before we actually had mass communication in the form that we have it today. So the word impeccable, as he uses it, means without sin. And I like that definition. He writes this: being impeccable with your word is not using the word against yourself. And he suggests that we badmouth ourselves. We use our words to attack other people, hurting other people, and then hurting ourselves as well. And he views that gossip, that black magic, as poison. And so he says, being impeccable with your word is the correct use of your energy in the direction of truth, in the direction of love, not for another, but for yourself. And if we free ourselves from all of that negativity, then we stop making our minds this fertile ground where we can plant those seeds of fear or negativity. We can free ourselves of the perpetual poisoning that zaps all of our energy. We can flow our energy instead in the direction of our wholeness. This first agreement, and by the way, all of the agreements, many of us in Unity teachings have talked about how each of these 4 and now 5 agreements align with our 5 Unity principles. And when you think about being impeccable with your word, you might think that this particular agreement aligns with our 3rd Unity principle, that we co-create our experiences, our reality. When in actuality, this first agreement, be impeccable with your word, aligns with our 4th Unity principle, that piece of us that knows that through affirmative prayer and meditation, we can connect with God. We have creative thinking available to us that aligns perfectly who and what we are, the very essence of who God is, 2nd Unity principle. Now, when we talk about be impeccable with your word, let's look at the word word. Maybe you've heard the word logos. That came from the Greek New Testaments. It was a big word used well over 3,000 times in the New Testament. And it meant word or speech or utterance or a message. And the most famous first liner of all the books in the New Testament is John 1:1. In the beginning was the word, logos, and the word was with God, and the word was God. We use affirmative prayer meditation to raise our awareness of spirit in our life. We go inward for that connection. And we make that journey from our head to our heart first. We can place our thoughts to the side. We can actually come to that place in meditation where we still our thoughts. And from that place, new creation can be accomplished. But if we're in the same vibration as the old way of thinking, because we've got momentum behind that, and without taking that time of meditation, we just perpetuate it more and more. And so we're not talking about little white lies when we talk about being impeccable with your word. It's not like I'm sorry, I can't come to your party, when what you really mean is, I don't want to come to your party. What we're talking about is a flawless, impeccable truth in which we can stay grounded, where we can face whatever we see before us, that we can deny that negative, hurtful presence within another or within our own world can harm us. And instead, we can affirm that even a few days from now, I will not have this situation in my life. I will not struggle. I will be living in harmony instead. So impeccable means without flaw, without error. I grew up, I didn't play a lot of sports, but I was really good at one thing, and that was archery. I had a bow and arrow strapped to me the entire childhood. And in archery, we understand that the word sin, which used to be spelled S-Y-N, simply means to miss the mark, that we can miss the mark and have sinned. But does that take us to that place of hell? No, it simply means we've missed the mark and we can try again. And so as we think about it in that way, we can also think about what Einstein said. If you keep doing the same thing that you're doing over and over and expecting a different result, you will become insane. Ruiz defines it as rejection, as well as anything that goes against another is happening as it goes against yourself. And if you blame and shame yourself over and over, you're not connecting with affirmative prayer and meditation. You're not being impeccable with your word. You're using it totally different. It's a misunderstanding, a misuse. And so to be impeccable with our word is the very foundation of any story. If we're aligned with the truth, in metaphysics, we understand that the lens through which Unity and New Thought students choose to look at things can align through truth. And the metaphysical interpretation might include the perspective of self, our human self, or our divine or absolute self. To be impeccable with your word is to be true with yourself, with that greater part of you, to be true to your nature, to your absolute divine, whole, unique self. And according to a lot of religions, in the beginning, nothing existed. And the very first thing that God created was a messenger, an angel who delivered a message in some way. And you might understand the need for something that could transfer from one place to another. Of course, from nowhere to nowhere seems a little bit complicated, but it's a very simple understanding that God created the word. The word is unto itself a messenger. And then if God created the word to deliver a message, and if the word is a messenger, then that's what you are, a messenger, an angel. The word exists because of that force that we call life. It's an intention, and nothing can exist without it. Nothing can exist without the word, because the word is what we use to create everything we know. So you're telling yourself a story every day about someone or something, but is it a truth-filled story? If you're using the word to create a story with self-judgment or self-rejection, then you're using the word against yourself. You're not being impeccable. And when you're impeccable, you're not going to tell yourself, I'm old, or I'm ugly, or I'm fat, or I'm not good enough, or I'm unworthy. You're going to use your knowledge against yourself there, which means your voice of knowledge is not going to use the word to judge you, to find you guilty, to punish you. Your mind is so powerful that it perceives the story that you create. And if you create self-judgment, you create inner conflict and chaos. And that becomes not a dream, but rather a nightmare. And your happiness is always up to you. It depends on no one else but you. And so if we get angry and use the word to send emotional poison to someone, then it appears that we're using the word against that person, but really using it against ourselves. So as you can see, impeccability of the word goes a lot deeper than it seems. The word is pure magic, as Ruiz says. And when you adopt that first agreement, then magic just begins to happen in your life in one direction or another. And your intentions and your desires come easily when there's no resistance, when it's not based in fear, when there's only love. You are at peace, you are creating a life of freedom and fulfillment in every way. And when he talks about looking at this and knowing that our word is so powerful that we can either free ourselves or enslave ourselves, think about that power within your own mind. That you are so free, you can choose to be a slave. You are so free that you can choose bondage. So I often think about other quotes that would align with this. To thine own self be true comes to mind. But one of my favorite things that the Buddha ever said was this: whatever words we utter should be chosen with great care for people, because they will hear them, they will be influenced by them for good or for ill. The great poet and mystic Rumi once said, "Raise your words, not your voice. It's the rain that grows flowers, not the thunder." So from the four agreements, for years, we have received gossip from words of others, but also the gossip that we tell ourselves. And we talk to ourselves constantly. I noticed through COVID, when I was isolated alone for weeks or months, that I began to talk to myself, not just in my head, but out loud. And we talk to ourselves all the time because constantly we're saying things that are not aligned with our true nature, with our truth. And we have to understand that we can begin with a new word, one that is based in love and peace and truth. And if we understand this first agreement, be impeccable with your word, we begin to see that all the changes and all the power of those changes happen and begin to be created within our own individual life. Changes first in the way we deal with ourselves, and then later in how we deal with others. So consider that your opinion is only your point of view, created from your belief system, your ego, your dream. And then we begin to spread and tell that dream. You know, today is a special day in Unity. It's our co-founder Myrtle Fillmore's birthday. So we celebrate Myrtle today. And I think about how she was impeccable with her word. She had an illness, as most know, for a lot of years of her life. And you can imagine what others were saying to her in a time where technology and modern medicine wasn't quite as available as it is today, that there was a lot of fear in her illness. And she was able to come to that place through prayer and meditation to find her new word, to be able to say, I am a child of the Most High. I cannot inherit sickness. She was able to deny that had power over her and instead be able to say, I am whole, I am healthy, I am well, and begin to believe that story. And when you surrender every untruth that keeps you tethered to who you were, then you begin to wonder, am I not worthy? Am I not ready? And you surrender unto the universal law that allows that to become. But we can change that. We can go to that place where we can still those thoughts and create a new word, a new understanding, a new logos. And you can trust that beyond absence, there is presence, that beyond pain, there is healing. Beyond brokenness, there is wholeness. Beyond hurt, there is forgiveness. Beyond silence, there is spirit. And beyond all manner of fear, there's love. Every day, every single minute that we're on this planet, we are all presented with people and experiences, opportunities and challenges. And every one of them holds a glimmering possibility in the area of letting go and letting God, of letting go of the old and letting love take that place. And so the answer to nurturing our truest connection always lies within, in our agreement with ourselves to live a principled life. We can navigate from that place of difficulty where it requires a change in our perspective and into that place of spiritual practice where we can aim for something higher, both in our personal goals of life, but also in our belief system, in this book of law that we carry in our heart. And when we aim in consciousness to connect with that natural, inherent piece of us, that body of unchanging ethical principles that form the basis of our human experience, we can find that the universal truth in all of the teachings, no matter the culture, no matter the religion, has to do with agreements like this, that we can be impeccable with our word, that we don't have to take another's opinion, but rather that we can hold something within us that knows, that understands, that is wise, that is good. I personally believe our soul smiles every time we return to the agreement that we've made with ourselves and with spirit, and the awareness of that cosmic rhythm allowing ourselves to not just be in touch with our soul again, but to be in touch with the understanding of how God sees us, of why we were made. I'll close with this. When we're in touch with our soul in that way, when we're in touch with the agreements that our soul has made, then what's happening is we are eavesdropping on the wisdom of the universe. Let's practice a little more often. Let's be more impeccable with our word, not just outwardly, but inwardly. Thank you all. Always be with you.